My name is Hazel Mitchell, and I just turned 35. Behind my unassuming appearance lies the truth. I'm a tech CEO worth millions, but my family has no idea. For years, my cousin Eric has delighted in painting me as a failure at every family gathering. So when Mom insisted I attend my birthday dinner at their house, I knew what was coming. What Eric didn't know was that this time would be different. This time, I was done hiding my success. Before I tell you what happened at that disaster of a birthday dinner, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to deal with toxic family members who underestimate you. I grew up in Millfield, one of those small Midwestern towns where everyone knows your business and dreams rarely extend beyond the county line. My parents were hardworking people who lived paycheck to paycheck. Dad was a mechanic at the local garage, and Mom worked as a receptionist at the elementary school. They weren't poor, exactly, but there was never much wiggle room in the budget. Birthday presents were modest but thoughtful. Vacations meant camping at the state park an hour away, and clothes came from discount stores or hand-me-downs. Despite our limited finances, my parents emphasized education. "Your brain is your best asset," Mom would say, while helping me with homework at our kitchen table. "Nobody can take that away from you." They might not have had college degrees themselves, but they recognized its importance for my future. From an early age, I showed an interest in computers that bordered on obsession. When I was 10, our school got its first computer lab, and I would spend every available minute there, figuring out how the machines worked. By 12, I was teaching myself basic programming from library books. At 14, I built my first rudimentary website. While my parents encouraged this interest in their own way, saving to buy me a second-hand computer when I turned 16, they didn't really understand it. "Just don't forget to go outside sometimes," Dad would joke, clearly mystified by my fascination with code and circuits. My cousin Eric, 4 years older and the son of my mom's sister, found my interests worthy of constant mockery. "Look at the nerd girl with her computer," he'd say at family gatherings. "Good luck finding a husband when all you can talk about is bites and whatever." Eric was everything. I wasn't conventionally popular, athletic, socially confident. He was the football team quarterback, dated cheerleaders, and moved through high school like he owned the place. His parents, my Aunt Linda and Uncle Dave, had more money than mine and never hesitated to spend it on Eric and his younger sister. New cars, brand-name clothes, lavish graduation parties, Eric had it all. Family gatherings were particularly difficult. While Eric regaled everyone with tales of touchdowns and prom king nominations, I sat quietly, knowing nobody would care about the coding competition I'd won or the advanced math class I'd tested into. When I did share something, Eric would inevitably cut me off. "Nobody cares about your computer club, Hazel," he'd say, laughing. "Tell us when you do something that actually matters." The worst part was how the adults would chuckle along, as if his dismissal of my interests was just good-natured teasing. My Aunt Linda would often follow up with something like, "Eric's just saying you should get out more, honey. Computers won't keep you warm at night." High school was 4 years of this dynamic Eric, starring in every arena that our small town valued, while I excelled in ways that were largely invisible. When graduation came, Eric had a full ride to play football at a prestigious university, courtesy of his parents' connections and checkbook. The entire family attended his send-off party, which featured a professional catering service and lasted until dawn. 2 months later, when I received a full academic scholarship to the State University for Computer Science, my achievement warranted a cake from the grocery store and a family dinner where conversation quickly turned to Eric's first college football game. "Are you sure about computer science?" my Aunt Linda asked during dessert. "That seems like such a male-dominated field. Wouldn't you be happier in education or nursing?" My mom, though well-meaning, added, "We're proud of you, honey, but Aunt Linda has a point. We just want you to be happy and employable," Eric added with a smirk. "Good luck finding a job playing with computers all day." I didn't bother explaining that computer science graduates were among the most sought after in the job market. I'd learned that facts rarely won arguments against Eric's confidence. College was liberating. Finally, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood the elegance of a well-designed algorithm and the satisfaction of debugging a stubborn piece of code. I thrived academically, making connections with professors who recognized my talent and peers who respected it. Meanwhile, Eric's football career peaked in his sophomore year. A knee injury sidelined him, and without sports dominating his identity, he suddenly had to rely on academics, an area he'd neglected. Still, his parents' money ensured he stayed at his prestigious university, where he eventually switched to a business major that he squeaked through with C's and the occasional B. When we both graduated, Eric immediately landed a corporate job through his father's golf buddy. At my graduation dinner, which doubled as a celebration of Eric's new position, he couldn't help but showcase his superiority once again. "Starting salary is $65,000, he announced to the table, plus bonuses and a company car after the first year. "What about you, Hazel?" Aunt Linda asked, her tone suggesting she expected something less impressive. "I have a few interviews lined up," I said truthfully. What I didn't mention was that they were with innovative startups rather than established corporations. I'd learned to keep my cards close to my chest around family. "Well, not everyone can be as fortunate as Eric," Uncle Dave said, clapping his son on the back. "But I'm sure you'll find something suitable." That night, as I packed my belongings to move to the city, I made a decision that would shape the next decade of my life. I would stop seeking validation from people who were determined not to give it. My success, whatever form it took, would be on my terms. And maybe, just maybe, I'd keep it to myself until the right moment came to reveal it. Little did I know then just how satisfying that eventual revelation would be. My first job in tech was nothing glamorous. I joined a small startup called DataSync as a junior developer with a salary that barely covered rent in the city. My apartment was a studio on the 6th floor of a building with an unreliable elevator and thin walls that let me enjoy my neighbors' arguments in stunning detail. It was 12 blocks from the nearest subway station, which meant I walked in all weather conditions, including the brutal winter storms that swept through the city. The startup itself operated out of what was essentially a converted warehouse space, with exposed brick that looked charming in photographs, but created terrible acoustics and inconsistent heating. 10 of us shared a large table, our laptops inches apart, headphones our only defense against constant distractions. But what the job lacked in amenities, it made up for in experience. I was thrown into complex coding problems immediately, learning more in 3 months than my entire final year of college. My boss, a 30-something developer named Marcus, had a sink or swim mentality that pushed me beyond what I thought were my limits. "Figure it out," was his standard response to my questions, which was frustrating at first but eventually taught me to solve problems independently. My parents were skeptical about my move to the city. "Couldn't you find something closer to home?" Mom asked during our weekly phone calls. "Your cousin Eric's job gives him 4 weeks of vacation and full benefits." I didn't tell her that I was working 60-hour weeks for a company that might not exist in 6 months. I didn't mention that I ate ramen noodles 4 nights a week to save money, and I certainly didn't share that I slept on an air mattress for the first 3 months because I couldn't afford a proper bed. Eric visited the city about 6 months into my time at DataSync, ostensibly for a business conference but primarily to showcase his corporate success. He insisted on taking me to dinner at an upscale restaurant that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "Expense account," he explained, ordering a $100 bottle of wine without glancing at the price. One of the perks of working for a real company. When I mentioned I'd been learning a new programming language, he cut me off. "That's cute, Hazel, but let me tell you about the clients I'm handling now." He proceeded to name-drop companies and executives for the next 30 minutes, pausing only to criticize my apartment when he dropped me off. "This is where you live? Jesus, I thought you went to college. My cleaning lady lives in a nicer place than this." I didn't invite him up. DataSync folded after 18 months, unable to secure second-round funding. I took this as an opportunity rather than a setback, using my savings, meager as they were, to spend 2 months developing my own app idea, a privacy-focused calendar that automatically encrypted sensitive appointments. It was a good concept with terrible execution, and it joined the digital graveyard of apps that never gained traction. 3 more jobs followed over the next 4 years. Another startup that showed promise before imploding due to founder conflicts, a mid-sized tech company where I was consistently overlooked for promotion in favor of less qualified male colleagues, and a brief stint freelancing that taught me I hated chasing payments from clients. Each time my career hit a roadblock, Eric would somehow sense it and call to check in, which invariably meant telling me about his latest bonus or promotion. After one particularly difficult day, where I'd been laid off due to company restructuring, he called to tell me he'd just purchased a vacation home in the Hamptons. "You should visit sometime," he said insincerely, "although you'd need to buy some nicer clothes. They have standards out there." The tech industry's sexism became increasingly apparent as I progressed. In meetings, my ideas would be ignored until a male colleague repeated them. Clients would direct technical questions to junior male developers rather than to me, despite my senior position. At one company happy hour, the CTO drunkenly suggested I'd be more valuable if I smiled more in meetings. The turning point came when I met Rachel Chen at a Women in Tech conference. A veteran software architect 20 years my senior, Rachel had navigated the industry's bias and emerged as a respected leader. After my panel presentation on data security, she approached me with specific, insightful questions that demonstrated she'd actually been listening. "You have unusual clarity about complex systems," she said as we continued our conversation over coffee. "What are you working on now?" For the first time in years, I shared my ideas without restraint, including concepts for a revolutionary approach to data security that I'd been developing in my free time. Rachel listened intently, occasionally asking questions that pushed my thinking further. "You should be building this," she said finally, "not working for people who don't recognize your talent." "I've tried launching my own projects before," I admitted. "They never got off the ground." "Because you didn't have the right support," she countered, "or the right connections." She pulled out a business card. "I'm an angel investor now. Send me a proper business plan for this security concept. If it's as good on paper as it sounds in conversation, we should talk." That night, I stayed up until 4 a.m., drafting what would eventually become the foundation of my company. As dawn broke, I realized I hadn't felt this energized in years. When my family called that weekend to remind me about Thanksgiving plans, I made an excuse about work commitments. The truth was, I couldn't bear another holiday of Eric's boasting and my relatives' thinly veiled pity. I needed to focus without their voices in my head. "Your brother will be disappointed," Mom said, referring to Eric though we weren't siblings. "He just made regional manager and wanted to tell everyone in person." "I'm sure he'll manage without me," I replied, a response that confused my mother but made perfect sense to me. In that moment, I made another decision. I would keep my professional progress private from my family. No updates about Rachel's investment, no news about the promising initial development of my security software, nothing about the small team I was beginning to assemble. If they assumed I was still struggling, let them. The narrative of Hazel the underachiever was too deeply entrenched to fight against. Besides, I reasoned, success would speak for itself when the time was right. Over the next months, Rachel became both mentor and investor, helping me refine my business model and introducing me to key contacts in the industry. My data security concept, which used a novel approach to encryption that balanced security with accessibility, began taking shape as an actual product. "You're on to something revolutionary here," Rachel told me after reviewing our first prototype. "But you need to be prepared for how hard this journey will be. Are you ready for that?" Looking around at my still modest apartment, thinking of all the birthdays and holidays I'd missed while working, remembering Eric's smug face every time he highlighted my perceived failures, I knew my answer. I've been ready my whole life. The email confirming our first round of seed funding arrived on a Tuesday morning in early spring. Rachel had connected me with a venture capital firm that specialized in security startups, and after 6 grueling weeks of meetings, pitches, and due diligence, they'd decided to take a chance on my company now officially named Quantum Shield. The investment, $2.5 million. I stared at the number on my screen, momentarily unable to comprehend that this was real. When reality finally sank in, I did what any rational tech founder would do. I bought the expensive coffee from the cafe downstairs instead of making instant in my kitchenette, then went straight back to work. That first round of funding marked the beginning of what industry insiders would later call the quantum shield phenomenon. The initial capital allowed me to hire 3 brilliant developers who shared my vision, lease actual office space, though still modest, and begin aggressively developing our core security product. The work was all-consuming. 80-hour weeks became my norm, with code sessions that stretched until dawn and pitch meetings with potential clients squeezed into whatever hours remained. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, fueled by caffeine, and the increasingly concrete realization that we were building something truly special. You need to delegate more, Rachel advised 6 months in during one of our weekly check-in calls. This pace isn't sustainable, even for someone as driven as you. I will, I promised, knowing I wouldn't. The truth was, I didn't know how to slow down. Every line of code, every client meeting, every hiring decision felt crucial, as if the entire enterprise might collapse if I looked away for even a moment. 8 months after our initial funding, we released the beta version of our security software to a select group of mid-sized companies. The feedback was beyond encouraging. We've never seen anything with this level of protection that still allows for seamless user experience, wrote the CTO of a healthcare data management company. When can we implement this across our entire system? Similar responses poured in from other beta testers, each validation pushing us to refine and expand our offering. The problem: we'd identified the vulnerability of sensitive data, despite existing security measures, clearly resonated with businesses across multiple sectors. By the end of our first full year, Quantum Shield had secured contracts with 2 Fortune 500 companies, expanded to a team of 15, and was generating enough revenue to suggest we might actually become profitable ahead of projections. My initial salary was modest. I wanted to reinvest as much as possible into the company, but for the first time in my adult life, I didn't check my bank account with dread before making purchases. The real turning point came 18 months after our launch. A major tech conglomerate, Megasoft, approached us about acquiring Quantum Shield for $40 million. The offer was tempting, especially considering we'd started with just $2.5 million in funding, but something felt wrong about surrendering control so early in our journey. After 3 days of intense discussions with Rachel and our board, I declined the offer. "This is either the smartest or stupidest decision you'll ever make," Rachel said afterward, but her smile suggested she approved. It proved to be the former. 6 months later, as news of our rejection spread through industry channels, Quantum Shield's reputation soared. If we were valuable enough for Megasoft to want us, other companies reasoned, our technology must be exceptional. New clients signed contracts. Additional investors expressed interest. Tech publications began requesting interviews, which I largely declined, preferring to let our work speak for itself. My aversion to publicity wasn't just about maintaining focus, it was also about preserving the privacy I'd come to value. The less my name and face circulated online, the less likely my family would discover my success before I was ready to reveal it. 3 years after our founding, Quantum Shield employed over 100 people, had offices in 3 cities, and was valued at just under $200 million. We'd expanded beyond our initial security product to develop an entire ecosystem of privacy-focused tools for businesses and, increasingly, individual consumers concerned about data protection. The financial reality of this success finally began to manifest in my personal life. I purchased a home, not just any home, but a stunning contemporary mansion overlooking the water, with floor-to-ceiling windows, a professional-grade kitchen I rarely used, and a dedicated office space with the most advanced technology configuration money could buy. My car collection grew from my reliable but aging sedan to include a Tesla Model S, a vintage Porsche, and a practical but luxury SUV for everyday use. My wardrobe transitioned from functional basics to custom-tailored pieces, chosen with the help of a personal stylist. These changes weren't about flaunting wealth. They were about finally allowing myself the comfort and quality I'd earned through years of sacrifice and hard work. After so long living on ramen and sleeping on an air mattress, There was something deeply satisfying about sinking into an obscenely comfortable custom mattress at the end of each day. Through it all, I maintained my radio silence with my family about my professional success. Our communications had dwindled to occasional phone calls with my parents and obligatory birthday messages. I sent generous gifts for special occasions, but always arranged for them to come from stores rather than directly from me, avoiding any questions about how I could afford such presents. Eric, now firmly established in his corporate career, with the title of regional manager he'd so proudly announced years ago, still found ways to slip comparisons into the few interactions we had. "Must be nice to have the freedom of your lifestyle," he commented during a rare phone call. "Some of us have actual responsibilities to handle." The irony of his statement as I took his call while signing off on a multi-million-dollar contract was not lost on me. My parents occasionally expressed worry about my future. "We just want to make sure you're saving for retirement," Mom said during one call. "You know how unstable those tech jobs can be." I assured them I was being financially responsible, without elaborating that I had more in my investment portfolio than they'd earned in their entire working lives combined. As my 35th birthday approached, I found myself at a crossroads. Quantum Shield was stable and thriving. I had competent leadership in place that could handle operations without my constant oversight. For the first time in years, I had space to breathe and reflect. And what I realized in that reflection was that I was tired of hiding, tired of diminishing my achievements when talking to family, tired of Eric's unwarranted superiority and my relatives' misplaced concern. When Mom called to insist I come home for a birthday dinner, explaining that the whole extended family would be gathering in my honor, something shifted inside me. "I'll be there," I said, surprising both of us with my easy agreement. "Oh, wonderful," she responded, clearly having expected a negotiation. "Everyone will be so happy to see you." As I ended the call, I looked around at my beautiful home, thought about the company I'd built from nothing, and made a decision. This birthday would indeed be a celebration of my success, my journey, and most satisfyingly, the end of Eric's reign as the family's definitive success story. The phone call from my mother came on a Wednesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly projections with my executive team. "Hazel, honey," her voice carried through my office speaker. "I know you're busy with whatever it is you do these days, but your birthday is coming up next month, and we really want you to come home for a proper family celebration." I signaled to my CFO that I needed a moment and picked up the handset for privacy. "Mom, I appreciate the thought, but I've got a lot going on right now." It wasn't exactly a lie. Leading a multi-million-dollar company kept my calendar perpetually full, but it wasn't the real reason for my hesitation either. "It's your 35th birthday, Hazel. That's important. Everyone's asking about you, Aunt Linda, Uncle Dave." She paused meaningfully. "Eric and his wife are coming too. He just got another promotion. Did you hear?" Of course she'd mention Eric. In my family's hierarchy of achievements, Eric's corporate climbing would always outrank whatever nebulous tech work they imagined I did. "I'll think about it," I said noncommittally. "Please do more than think about it," Mom pressed. "Your father and I aren't getting any younger, and family gatherings mean a lot to us." The gentle guilt trip was effective, as it had been designed to be. I felt the familiar tug of obligation warring with my desire to avoid another evening of Eric's subtle digs and my relatives' well-intentioned but uninformed advice about my career. "I'll let you know by Friday," I conceded, ending the call and returning to my meeting. That evening, I called my best friend Lauren, who had been my confidant since college, and one of the few people who knew the full extent of both my success and my family situation. "They want me to come home for my birthday," I explained, curled up on the oversized sofa in my living room, overlooking the city lights, complete with Eric showcasing his latest promotion. "So don't go," Lauren said simply. "Send a nice gift basket and claim a work emergency." I swirled the expensive Cabernet in my glass, watching how the light played through the deep red liquid. "I've been doing that for years. Maybe it's time for a change." "What kind of change?" Lauren's voice held a note of suspicion. "Hazel, what are you thinking?" "Maybe it's time they knew about this." I gestured around my luxurious home, though Lauren couldn't see it through the phone. about Quantum Shield, about everything I've built while they've been feeling sorry for me. There was a long pause before Lauren responded. Are you sure? You've been so adamant about keeping your worlds separate. She was right. I'd maintained an almost obsessive division between my professional success and my family relationships. Part of it was about focusing on building my company without family complications. But a larger part, the part I rarely admitted even to myself, was about waiting for the perfect moment of vindication. I'm tired of the pretense, I said finally. I'm tired of Eric's smug superiority, and everyone acting like I'm some struggling failure they need to worry about. So this would be what a grand reveal. A surprise, I'm actually wildly successful moment? Lauren didn't bother hiding her skepticism. That feels a little petty, I suggested. I was going to say theatrical, but sure, petty works too. I laughed, despite myself. This was why I valued Lauren's friendship, her willingness to challenge me when needed. Maybe it is petty, I acknowledged. But maybe it's also about finally being authentic with my family. I've built something important, something that matters. Why should I keep hiding that? If authenticity is the goal, I'm all for it, Lauren said. Just be honest with yourself about your motivations. And maybe prepare for reactions that aren't what you're expecting. After our call ended, I stood at my wall of windows, looking out at the city where I'd built my life and success. Lauren's warning echoed in my mind. Was I really seeking authenticity? Or was I orchestrating a moment of triumph over childhood slights? Perhaps it was both. The next morning, I called my mother and confirmed I would attend my birthday dinner. Her delight was palpable, though mixed with surprise at my easy acquiescence after years of finding excuses to avoid extended family gatherings. The 2 weeks leading up to the dinner were filled with subtle preparations. I selected my outfit carefully, a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks that were clearly expensive but not flashy, paired with a watch that cost more than my first car but could pass for simple and understated to the untrained eye. My approach to revelations, I decided, would be gradual rather than dramatic. I also prepared mentally, rehearsing calm responses to the inevitable questions and comments about my career, my single status, my life choices. I was determined to maintain composure regardless of what Eric or anyone else might say. The drive to my hometown took just over 3 hours, though my Tesla made it comfortable enough that the time passed quickly. As familiar landmarks began to appear, the old water tower, the strip mall where I'd had my first job, the high school football field where Eric had been king, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and distance, as if these places belonged to someone else's life. My parents' home looked smaller than I remembered, though it had only been a year since my last visit. The modest 2-story house with its slightly worn exterior and carefully maintained garden represented everything about my upbringing. Practical, unpretentious, focused on making do rather than standing out. Several cars already lined the driveway and street, including a gleaming new BMW that could only belong to Eric. I parked my Tesla behind it, amused by the unintentional symbolism of the two vehicles, his lease status symbol versus my outright owned luxury car that represented just a fraction of my actual wealth. As I gathered the gift bags from my trunk containing thoughtfully selected presents that would pass for generous but not suspiciously extravagant, anxiety fluttered in my stomach. For years, I'd avoided exactly this scenario, being surrounded by family members who thought they knew me and my life, who had cast me in a role I had long since outgrown. Memories of previous gatherings flashed through my mind. Eric dominating conversations, my achievements minimized or ignored, the subtle undercurrent of pity whenever my career was mentioned. The last family event I'd attended had been my cousin's wedding 2 years ago, where Eric had cornered me at the reception to explain how his 401k contributions demonstrated his financial acumen, while expressing concern about people in creative fields not planning properly for retirement. My hand hesitated on the door handle of my car. I could still leave, make up an emergency, apologize profusely, send gift cards tomorrow, return to my comfortable life where my success wasn't questioned and my value wasn't measured against Eric's conventional achievements. But no, I had made my decision. It was time to rewrite the narrative. With a deep breath, I stepped out of the Tesla, collected my bags, and walked up the familiar concrete path to my parents' front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open to reveal my mother, her face lighting up at the sight of me. "Hazel, you're here! Come in, come in! Everyone's so excited to see you." As she pulled me into a tight hug, I steeled myself for what was to come. One way or another, this birthday dinner would be memorable. The living room fell into an awkward hush as I entered, then erupted into a chorus of birthday wishes and exclamations about how long it had been since they'd seen me. My father enveloped me in a bear hug, whispering, "Happy birthday, kiddo," in my ear, before releasing me to the swarm of relatives. Aunt Linda air-kissed both my cheeks, holding me at arm's length to examine me. "You look healthy," she declared, managing to make it sound like a consolation prize rather than a compliment. Uncle Dave patted my shoulder. "The city life must agree with you, though I still say there's nothing like small-town living." I made my way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries and deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. My cousin Melissa showed me pictures of her children. My Uncle Bob wanted to know if I'd seen the new shopping center that had replaced the old movie theater downtown. Eric was conspicuously absent from the welcoming committee, though I could hear his distinctive laugh coming from the kitchen. Of course he'd make an entrance, he always did. "Dinner's almost ready," Mom announced, shepherding everyone toward the dining room, where she'd set up the extended table with her best tablecloth and the china reserved for special occasions. Just as we were taking our seats, Eric strode in with his wife Jessica, who was balancing a bottle of wine and an elaborate cake box. "Sorry we're running behind," Eric announced without sounding remotely apologetic. "Conference call with the Tokyo office ran long. You know how it is when you're handling international accounts." His gaze landed on me, and his smile widened fractionally. "Well, look who made it. The prodigal daughter returns. Happy birthday, cousin." "Thanks, Eric," I replied evenly. "Good to see you too." He approached for the obligatory hug, whispering, "Love the sweater. Outlet Mall?" Before I could respond, Jessica intervened with a warmer greeting and a genuine compliment on my watch, which she correctly identified as a luxury brand. I wondered if Eric had purchased one for her, or if her eye was simply better trained than his. Dinner began with Mom's pot roast, my childhood favorite, and a steady stream of family updates. Conversation flowed around me, touching on local gossip, health concerns, and the achievements of various family members. I contributed appropriately but minimally, observing the dynamics I'd grown up with now from an adult perspective. Eric dominated the discussion as expected, each anecdote carefully crafted to highlight his importance. He described his recent business trip to Chicago as if he'd negotiated international peace treaties rather than regional sales contracts. "Of course, now that I'm overseeing 3 states, the travel is constant," he explained, gesturing with his wine glass. "The company keeps expanding my territory because they know I can handle the pressure." Jessica nodded supportively beside him, though I caught a flicker of something like exhaustion cross her face when he mentioned being gone 4 days a week. "What about you, Hazel?" Aunt Linda asked, during a rare pause in Eric's monologue. "Still working at that internet company?" This was my first opportunity to correct the record, but as all eyes turned to me, I decided to wait. The timing didn't feel right yet. "I've moved on from that position, actually," I said simply. "Oh, did you find something better?" Mom asked hopefully. Eric chuckled. "In this economy, tech jobs are being cut left and right. Smart companies are consolidating under experienced management, like what we're doing in my division." "I've been keeping busy," I replied noncommittally, taking a sip of water. Eric, perhaps sensing my reluctance, seized the opening. "The tech bubble's bursting, from what I hear. Lots of those fly-by-night startups going under. That's why I've always advocated for established companies with proven track records." "Eric just got a substantial raise with his promotion," Aunt Linda announced proudly. "They're looking at houses in the executive neighborhood now." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely happy for Jessica, if nothing else. "Congratulations." "It's just the next logical step," Eric said with affected modesty. "Put in the work, play the game right, and success follows." Not everyone has the temperament for corporate advancement, of course. Some people prefer flexibility over stability. The subtle dig wasn't lost on me or my parents, judging by the quick glance they exchanged. Speaking of houses, my mother interjected, clearly trying to shift the conversation. Hazel, are you still in that apartment downtown? Before I could answer, Eric laughed. Probably with 3 roommates by now, given city rents. Unless, he raised an eyebrow, there's a special someone sharing the expenses we don't know about. I live alone, I confirmed, choosing not to elaborate further. At 35, that's. Aunt Linda trailed off, searching for a diplomatic phrase. Independent, my father supplied firmly. I was going to say unusual, Aunt Linda finished. Most women, your age, are settled by now, even in your field. The dinner continued in this vein through the main course and into dessert, a steady stream of remarks highlighting Eric's achievements juxtaposed against questions that framed my life as somehow lacking or incomplete. When Mom brought out my birthday cake, a store-bought sheet cake, in contrast to the artisanal creation Jessica had brought for the general dessert, Eric took it upon himself to lead a somewhat patronizing toast. To my cousin Hazel, he raised his glass, still marching to her own drummer after all these years. While some of us took the traditional route, college, career, family, Hazel has always been, shall we say, unconventional. My mother's expression tightened slightly at his tone, but she said nothing. So here's to 35 years. Eric continued, and to figuring out what you want to be when you grow up. There's still time, cuz. Not much, but some. A few uncomfortable chuckles circled the table. Jessica stared intently at her plate. My father cleared his throat but remained silent. I maintained my smile, letting the moment stretch as I decided exactly how to respond. The room seemed to hold its breath. Thank you for that. Colorful toast, I said finally, my voice calm and measured. It's interesting you should mention careers, actually. Eric's smug expression faltered slightly at my tone. I've been meaning to update everyone on my professional situation, since there seems to be some confusion about what I actually do. Oh, we know you work with computers, honey, Aunt Linda interjected. Some kind of technical support, right? Eric snickered behind his wineglass. Something in me snapped, not in an angry way, but in the manner of a dam finally giving way to pressure that had built up over years. The carefully constructed barrier between my 2 lives, family and success, dissolved in an instant. Actually, I said clearly, I'm the founder and CEO of Quantum Shield. We're a data security company headquartered downtown, with additional offices in Boston and Austin. The name clearly meant nothing to most of my family, though Jessica's eyes widened slightly in recognition. A CEO! Well, that sounds impressive, Uncle Dave said indulgently. One of those startup things, is it? How many employees in this company? Eric asked, making air quotes around the word company. I met his gaze directly. 127, at last count. We're hiring another development team next month. Eric's expression remained skeptical, but I could see uncertainty creeping in around the edges. And what exactly does your company do? In layman's terms, he added condescendingly, we've developed proprietary encryption technology that protects sensitive data for businesses and individuals, I explained simply. Our clients include healthcare systems, financial institutions, and government contractors. Sounds technical, Aunt Linda offered, clearly struggling to process this information. Wait, Jessica said suddenly. Quantum Shield, aren't you the company that was featured in Tech Innovator last month? The one that turned down the Megasoft acquisition? Eric's head snapped toward his wife, then back to me. That's us, I confirmed with a small nod. The offer wasn't aligned with our long-term vision. What was the offer, if you don't mind my asking? Jessica continued, ignoring Eric's warning glance. I hesitated only briefly. 40 million. The room went silent. Even the clinking of forks against plates ceased. $40 million? My father finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That was 3 years ago, I clarified. The company's current valuation is just under 200 million. Eric's face had gone from skeptical to stunned to slightly pale. You're saying you own a company worth $200 million? I'm the majority shareholder, yes. I took a sip of water, maintaining eye contact with him over the rim of my glass. But that would make you, my mother began. Quite successful, Jessica finished for her, something like admiration in her voice. Eric recovered quickly, his expression shifting to one of forced joviality. Well, our little Hazel's been keeping secrets. Though valuations for these tech companies can be pretty creative accounting. Am I right? All on paper until someone actually buys you out. Our annual revenue exceeded 60 million last year, I stated matter-of-factly. We've been profitable since year 3. I reached for my phone, pulled up a recent article about Quantum Shield's revolutionary approach to data security, and passed it to my father. He adjusted his reading glasses, his expression growing increasingly astonished as he scanned the page. "There's a picture of you with the governor," he said finally, showing the screen to my mother, whose hand flew to her mouth. "That was at a cybersecurity summit last fall," I explained. "We've been advising on state data protection policies." The phone made its way around the table, each relative's expression transforming as they confronted tangible evidence of my success. When it reached Eric, he stared at it for a long moment, his jaw working silently. "This is unexpected," he managed finally, handing the phone back without meeting my eyes. "I'm curious, Eric," I said, unable to resist pushing just a little further. "What exactly did you think I've been doing all these years?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, you never really talked about your work in concrete terms. Always vague references to projects and developing code. How were we supposed to know you were running some big company?" "You never asked," I pointed out quietly. "You assumed." An uncomfortable silence descended on the table. My mother, ever the peacemaker, attempted to change the subject. "So, that means you're not still in that little apartment downtown? The one with the, interesting neighbors?" I smiled. "No, Mom. I bought a house a few years ago." "Oh, that's wonderful. Whereabouts?" "Overlook Terrace," I said, naming one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the city. "It's on the waterfront." Eric's fork clattered against his plate. "That's where the CEO of Midwest Financial lives," Uncle Dave said, clearly impressed. "My golf buddy does their landscaping." "Brad Wilson?" "He's 3 doors down," I confirmed. "Nice family. And you drive." Eric gestured vaguely toward the street outside. "Today I brought the Tesla," I said casually. "It's good for longer drives. I have a few other cars for different purposes." Jessica gave a small, surprised laugh. "A few other cars? Like what?" I shrugged lightly. "A Porsche 911 from 1973 that I restored, that's more of a weekend car. And a Range Rover for practical things." Eric's face had gone from pale to slightly flushed. I could almost see the mental calculations happening behind his eyes, comparing his leased BMW to my car collection, his hoped-for executive home to my waterfront mansion, his regional management position to my role as CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. "You should all come visit sometime," I offered, looking around the table. "I have plenty of room for everyone. Mom, Dad, you could stay in the guest house. It has a great view of the sunrise over the water." "Guest house?" my mother repeated faintly. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" Eric pushed back from the table abruptly. "Just need some air." As he strode from the room, an awkward silence fell again. Jessica looked torn between following him and continuing the conversation. "I should probably check on him," she said finally, rising from her chair. But before leaving, she paused beside me. "For what it's worth, I always thought you were smart as hell, and that article didn't do justice to how groundbreaking your encryption model is. My firm's cybersecurity team talks about Quantum Shield all the time." With that surprising revelation, she left to find Eric, leaving me to face the remaining family members, whose expressions ranged from shock to disbelief to dawning pride. "Why didn't you tell us, honey?" Mom asked, her voice tinged with hurt. I considered how to answer honestly without causing more pain. At first, I was focused on building the company. Then, as things succeeded, I guess I got used to having separate worlds. And maybe part of me wanted to prove something before saying anything. "Prove what?" Dad asked. I looked at the doorway through which Eric had just exited and gave a small, sad smile. that I was worth taking seriously. The remainder of the evening unfolded in a blur of questions about my company, my home, my life in the city. Eric eventually returned, subdued, and making visible efforts to appear supportive rather than threatened. He even made a point of examining my Tesla in the driveway before I left, asking technical questions about its performance that suggested he was trying to establish some common ground. As I prepared to leave, gathering my things, and accepting the leftover birthday cake Mom insisted I take, Eric approached me in the foyer. "Listen, Hazel," he began awkwardly. "I may have underestimated your career trajectory." It was as close to an apology as Eric had ever come. "It happens," I said simply. "We should get together sometime. Professionally, I mean. My company could probably use whatever security stuff you provide." I recognized the attempted pivot from dismissing my success to trying to benefit from it and smiled politely. "Have your procurement team contact our sales office," I suggested, handing him a business card. "They'll set you up with the appropriate tier of service." His expression flickered between confusion and disappointment as he realized I wasn't offering preferential treatment. Right. Professional boundaries. I respect that. As I said my final goodbyes and walked toward my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret I'd carried for so long, my success, my achievements, my true life, was finally in the open. Whatever came next in my family, relationships would at least be based on truth rather than misconceptions. Eric called out just as I reached my car. "Hey, Hazel!" I turned back, one hand on the door handle. "Happy birthday," he said, with what appeared to be genuine sincerity. "You showed us all, didn't you?" I considered his words for a moment, then shook my head slightly. "That was never the point, Eric." As I drove away from my childhood home, the weight of expectations and old dynamics seemed to lift with each mile. Whether or not my family fully understood my journey or the significance of what I'd built, I had finally stepped fully into my own truth. And that, I realized, was the real birthday gift I had given myself. The Tesla hummed quietly as I navigated the familiar roads leading out of my hometown. Streetlights illuminated empty sidewalks. Most businesses already closed in this community that operated on an earlier schedule than my city life. Through the windshield, I caught a glimpse of my reflection, composed, confident, unruffled, despite the emotional evening I'd just experienced. I was halfway to the highway when my phone rang through the car's speakers. Lauren's name flashed on the dashboard display. "So?" she asked immediately when I answered. "How did Operation Shock and Awe go down?" I smiled despite myself. "Less theatrical than you might have imagined, but effective." "Details, Mitchell. I need details." Did Eric's head actually explode? Or did he just turn interesting colors? "He excused himself from the table at one point," I admitted. "And when he came back, he offered me business connections." Lauren's laugh filled the car interior. "Classic. He moved straight from dismissal to networking. Tell me everything, starting from the beginning." As I recounted the evening's events, I realized I felt none of the vindictive satisfaction I might have anticipated. Instead, I experienced something quieter and more profound, a sense of alignment, as if pieces of my life that had been deliberately kept separate were finally fitting together. The strangest part, I told Lauren as I merged onto the highway, was how quickly everyone adapted to the new reality. Within an hour, it was as if they'd always known I was successful. My Aunt Linda started telling me about her friend's daughter, who's very interested in computers and wondering if I might mentor her. "And your parents? How did they take it?" I considered the question. Shocked at first, then proud, I think, but also confused about why I hadn't shared this part of my life with them. Dad kept asking questions about the company like he was trying to piece together a timeline of what I'd been doing all these years. "Can you blame them? You've been living a double life, Miss Wayne." "Not a double life," I corrected. "Just a compartmentalized one. And now that the compartments have spilled into each other, how does that feel?" The question gave me pause. How did it feel to have my worlds collide after keeping them separate for so long? Honestly, liberating. I've spent so much energy maintaining the division between Family Hazel and CEO Hazel. It's exhausting, constantly filtering what I can say about my life, remembering which version of myself I'm supposed to be presenting. So no regrets about the big reveal? None, I said firmly, realizing as I spoke that it was true, though I'm still processing some of their reactions. 3 days after the birthday dinner, the processing continued as family members reached out in various ways. Mom called daily, each conversation venturing further into territory we'd never discussed before: my company's growth, my leadership philosophy, the challenges I'd faced as a female founder. "I wish you'd told us sooner," she said during our most recent call. "We would have been so proud." "Would you?" I asked gently. "Or would you have worried more? About the risks, the stress, the unconventional path?" Her silence acknowledged the truth in my question. Dad expressed his pride more directly. "Always knew you were smart as a whip," he declared, though we both recognized the revision of history in his statement. He'd supported me in his quiet way, but always knowing I'd achieve this level of success was a stretch. Aunt Linda sent a group email to extended family members with a link to an article about Quantum Shield, her message heavily implying she'd been in the know all along about her niece's achievements. Uncle Dave left a voicemail asking if I had any thoughts on his retirement investments. The most surprising response came from Jessica, who emailed me directly. *Hazel, I've admired your company's work for years through my position at Meridian Financial. Never made the connection that the Hazel Mitchell was my husband's cousin. Would love to grab coffee next time you're in town, professional curiosity aside. Eric's still processing, but he'll come around. Some people need time to adjust when the hierarchies they've constructed get flipped upside down. Jessica *. I appreciated her candor and responded warmly, suggesting we meet independently of family gatherings. Eric himself remained conspicuously silent for a week after the dinner, then sent a LinkedIn connection request with a message that read simply, "Impressed with what you've built. We should talk shop sometime." I accepted the connection, but let the suggestion of a conversation hover unanswered. Some relationships needed more time to recalibrate than others. During this period of family recalibration, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, not just the professional achievements, but the personal growth that had occurred alongside them. I remembered the first major contract Quantum Shield had secured, with a healthcare system protecting patient data. The night after signing the deal, I'd sat alone in my office, overwhelmed by the responsibility and the validation. There had been no family to call and share the news with, no Eric to prove wrong in that moment. The victory had been entirely my own, savored in private. I thought about the first time I'd walked through my house after purchasing it 15 rooms of space for just me, the expansive windows framing water views that still took my breath away. I'd stood in the empty great room, my footsteps echoing, and experienced a moment of doubt. Was all this really necessary for one person? But then I'd remembered the cramped apartments, the financial stress, the years of sacrifice, and decided that yes, allowing myself this luxury was not just acceptable but earned. And I reflected on the cars in my garage, not just transportation, but symbols of the freedom I'd achieved. The freedom to go where I wanted, when I wanted, without depending on anyone else's approval or assistance. These thoughts occupied me as I drove back to the city after a follow-up visit to my parents' home, a lunch that had been far more relaxed than the birthday dinner, with Mom proudly showing me she'd downloaded our consumer security app and Dad asking thoughtful questions about my business decisions. As I pulled into the circular driveway of my home, the security gates closing silently behind me, I felt a sense of completion. The facade had cracked, then shattered, leaving only truth in its place. Whatever came next in my family relationships would be built on a foundation of authenticity rather than assumptions and misunderstandings. The house lights activated automatically as I entered, illuminating the soaring ceilings and water views beyond. My phone chimed with an email notification, the head of our development team, with an update on our latest project. Tomorrow, I would return to being CEO Hazel, making decisions and leading my company forward. But tonight, I was simply Hazel daughter, cousin, woman, entrepreneur, whole and undivided for perhaps the first time in my adult life. And that integration, I realized, was worth more than any mansion, luxury car, or corporate valuation could ever be. The city lights glittered beneath me as I stood on the balcony of my penthouse office, 40 stories above the streets where I'd once walked in worn-out shoes, dreaming of the success I now lived. 6 weeks had passed since my birthday dinner revelation, and the ripple effects continued to reshape my family relationships in unexpected ways. My Tesla glided through the evening traffic as I headed home, my mind replaying the conversation I'd just had with Lauren over dinner. "So, was it everything you hoped for?" she'd asked, sipping her wine. The big reveal, the shocked faces, Eric's bruised ego. I considered her question carefully. "It wasn't about revenge," I said finally. "At least, not entirely." Lauren raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Okay, maybe 5% was about seeing Eric's expression," I admitted with a small laugh. "But the real victory wasn't putting him in his place. It was finally putting myself in mine, my authentic place, without filters or pretense." "And how's that working out for the Mitchell family dynamic?" "It's evolving," I said thoughtfully. "There's this strange period of recalibration happening. Like everyone's trying to reconcile the Hazel they thought they knew with the Hazel I actually am." The most visible evidence of this recalibration had come the previous weekend, when my parents had visited my home for the first time. I'd watched their faces as they took in the scale of the property, the sweeping staircase, the wall of awards and press mentions I'd accumulated, the view that stretched for miles across the water. "This is really all yours?" Mom had asked, running her hand along the custom marble countertop in the kitchen. "Not company property or anything?" "All mine," I'd confirmed, though I rarely use half the rooms. Dad had wandered into my home office, studying the framed photographs of me with various business and political figures. "Is that the governor?" he'd asked, pointing to a picture from a tech innovation summit. "Yes, she's been supportive of bringing more tech headquarters to the state." He'd nodded slowly, a mixture of pride and something else, perhaps regret, crossing his face. "We had no idea, Hazel, all these years." The guest house had particularly impressed them, larger than their entire home, with its own kitchen and expansive views. Mom had run her fingers over the expensive linens, peeked into the fully stocked refrigerator I'd prepared for their visit, and finally sat on the edge of the king-sized bed with tears in her eyes. "We didn't support you enough," she said suddenly. "When you were starting out, we should have believed in you more." I sat beside her, taking her hand. "You supported me in the ways you knew how, with the information you had. But Eric, we always made such a fuss over every little thing he did. And you were accomplishing all this without any acknowledgement from us." "I didn't do it for acknowledgement," I said gently. "And honestly, maybe the distance was necessary. It allowed me to define success on my own terms, without trying to meet someone else's expectations." The visit had ended with promises of more regular contact. My father taking dozens of photos to show the neighbors, and Mom hugging me tightly before they left. "I'm sorry we ever made you feel like you needed to hide your light," she whispered. Now, as I pulled into my garage and parked the Tesla alongside the Porsche and Range Rover, I reflected on Lauren's parting words at dinner. "Just be careful," she'd warned. "Success changes how people see you. Make sure it doesn't change how you see yourself or them." She was right, of course. Already, I'd noticed subtle shifts in how relatives treated me, requests for financial advice, hints about business opportunities, casual mentions of children's college funds. My cousin Melissa had called specifically to ask if I might consider investing in her husband's landscaping business. Eric remained the most complex case. After his initial silent period, he'd swung dramatically in the opposite direction, messaging me several times a week with various pretexts for connection. First came the business inquiries: could Quantum Shield provide security for his company? I directed him to our sales team. Next were the personal finance questions: what investment strategies would I recommend? I suggested a qualified financial advisor. Most recently, he'd mentioned bringing his son to the city for college visits and wondered if they might stop by to see my impressive setup. I hadn't responded to that last message yet. The dynamics were still too fresh, the reversal of our positions still too new. I needed time to ensure any relationship we rebuilt would be genuine, not colored by his recognition of my success. A week after my parents' visit, I made a decision that surprised even me. I established the Mitchell Family Education Foundation with an initial endowment of $5 million. The foundation would provide scholarships for students from my hometown pursuing degrees in technology, with special consideration for young women entering STEM fields. I didn't announce this to my family immediately, waiting instead for the paperwork to be finalized and the first application cycle to be established. When I finally shared the news, the response was overwhelmingly positive, especially from my parents, who would serve on the selection committee alongside me. "This is how you change things," Dad said simply. "This is how you make sure other kids don't have to leave home to be taken seriously." The foundation became a bridge between my past and present, a way to honor my roots while acknowledging how far I'd traveled from them. It also provided a constructive channel for family members who might otherwise have approached me with personal financial requests. Now they could refer promising students to the scholarship program instead. As summer turned to fall, I found an unexpected peace in the integration of my once separate worlds. Professional colleagues now sometimes heard stories about my hometown. Family members now understood references to my business challenges. The energy previously spent maintaining the division could be redirected to more meaningful pursuits. Perhaps the most profound shift occurred in my relationship with my own achievements. For years, I'd measured my success partly by how it would someday prove Eric and others wrong. The fantasy of eventually revealing my wealth and status had been a private motivation during difficult times, a secret promise that someday I would demonstrate my worth to those who had dismissed it. With that moment now realized, I found myself evaluating success differently, not as a comparative measure against someone else's achievements or expectations, but as an alignment with my own values and aspirations. The validation I had sought externally now came primarily from within. This realization crystallized during a conversation with Rachel, my original mentor and investor, who called to discuss a potential acquisition offer for Quantum Shield. "The number they're offering is substantial," she noted. "Nearly 3 times our current valuation. You could walk away with generational wealth." 5 years earlier, I might have immediately calculated how many more cars, houses, or luxury items such a sum could purchase physical proof of my success that could be displayed and recognized. Now, I found myself considering different questions. Would the acquisition further our mission of data protection? Would our team continue to thrive? Would I find fulfillment in whatever came next? "I need to think about it," I told Rachel. "It's not just about the number." Her quiet approval confirmed I was asking the right questions. The ultimate resolution with Eric came unexpectedly during a family Thanksgiving gathering at my home, the first holiday I'd hosted for the extended family. I'd hired a chef, prepared guest rooms for those traveling from out of town, and generally embraced my role as the successful relative with the means to bring everyone together. Eric arrived with Jessica and their 2 children, visibly impressed, but making efforts not to appear intimidated by the setting. Throughout the afternoon, he oscillated between overly casual, "Nice place you've got here, cuz," and awkwardly deferential, "Hazel would know best about that. She's the tech genius in the family." After dinner, as the family scattered throughout the house, some watching football in the media room, others exploring the grounds, I found Eric alone on the terrace, looking out at the water. "Quite a view," I commented, joining him at the railing. "Quite a life," he replied, glancing sideways at me. "You really did it, Hazel. Everything I used to brag about doesn't compare to all this." "That's not why I invited everyone here," I said. "This isn't about comparison." "Isn't it, though? A little bit?" His tone wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. "After all those years of me lording my conventional success over you?" I considered his question honestly. "Maybe initially, but proving you wrong turned out to be far less satisfying than I'd imagined." "No. I think it was probably exactly as satisfying as you imagined," he countered with unexpected insight. "It just didn't last. The satisfaction, I mean." I laughed softly, surprised by his perception. "That's actually pretty accurate." We stood in silence for a moment, watching boats move across the distant water. "I wasn't always kind to you growing up," he said finally. "Or as adults, for that matter. No, you weren't. I think I needed to believe my path was the only valid one. That following the rules, doing things the expected way, was what defined success." He swirled the drink in his glass. "When you started forging your own path, it threatened that belief system. And now?" He shrugged. "Now I'm wondering if I've been measuring success by the wrong metrics all along. Jessica loves her work. You clearly love yours. Me? I've been chasing promotions and status symbols without ever asking if the chase itself makes me happy." It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd ever had, an acknowledgement not just of our past dynamics, but of the questions that shaped our present choices. "It's not too late to ask those questions," I offered. "Even at our age? Pushing 40? Especially at our age. We're old enough to know what matters, and young enough to pivot toward it." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that you won, or that I was wrong, but that success looks different for different people, and that it can look different at different stages of the same life," I added. Before we rejoined the others, Eric extended his hand. "Truce? No more one-upmanship, no more comparisons, just family." I shook his hand firmly. Just family. That evening, after the last guest had departed and the house returned to its usual quiet state, I walked through the rooms that had so impressed my relatives: the chef's kitchen where we'd gathered for appetizers, the formal dining room that had hosted our Thanksgiving meal, the terrace where Eric and I had finally found common ground. These spaces, once symbols of achievement to be revealed at the perfect moment of vindication, now held different meaning. They weren't trophies to display my worth, but settings for genuine connection, for family holidays and honest conversations, for the integration of my past and present. I realized that the true freedom I'd found wasn't in the revelation of my success, but in the release from needing that revelation to validate me. The mansion, the luxury cars, the corporate achievements, they were real and significant, but they weren't the measure of my life's value. That value existed independent of recognition, comparison, or external validation. This understanding didn't diminish my pride in what I'd built. Quantum Shield continued to thrive and expand, innovating in data security and employing hundreds of talented people. My financial security provided options and opportunities I'd once only dreamed of. But these accomplishments now existed within a broader context of what constituted a successful life, one that included meaningful relationships, personal growth, and positive impact on others. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone chimed with an email notification. It was from the Mitchell Family Education Foundation administrator, informing me that the first round of scholarship applications had been received. 27 students from my hometown, 18 of them young women interested in technology careers. I smiled, imagining these students embarking on journeys that might parallel or diverge from my own. Whatever paths they chose, whatever metrics of success they eventually embraced, the foundation would help ensure they had options beyond the limited expectations that had once constrained my horizons. And perhaps that was the most meaningful measure of success. After all, not the fortune, mansion, or luxury cars that had featured in my moment of revelation, but the doors I could now help open for others. Looking back at the birthday dinner that had changed everything, I realized the greatest gift hadn't been the shocked expressions or the revised family narrative. It had been the freedom to finally integrate all aspects of myself into one authentic whole: the small-town girl who loved computers, the driven entrepreneur who built something meaningful, the successful woman who could now support her family and community. The revelation had been necessary, but the resolution was what mattered: the lessons learned, the relationships recalibrated, the personal growth that continued long after the initial drama had faded. True success, I now understood, wasn't about revealing accomplishments to others. It was about revealing one's authentic self to oneself first, and then to the world, and finding peace in that revelation. Have you ever had to hide your success from family or friends? Or perhaps you've been underestimated by someone who later had to eat their words. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, Subscribe to hear more stories like this one, and share with someone who might need a reminder that success is best measured on your own terms. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, the greatest freedom comes not from proving others wrong, but from living authentically right.